Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Military Money Mistakes Live on this lovely, or not so lovely, here where I'm at in Virginia Friday. Um, appreciate you taking the time to join me today. Quick update, couple more spots left for the beta cohort. I've got a little over a week till we do the first one. So if you're still interested in that, um, I do believe I had a comment on there. I posted a comment on there with a link where you can actually sign up for that if you'd like to do that. Also, want to take the opportunity to invite you to the Insiders portal that Scott Tucker and I, mostly Scott, has been doing all the legwork getting that set up. And so I'm appreciative of that. And, I just kind of hopped on the bandwagon there with him. There's also a link in the comments for there. And then something else we're doing after this. Scott and I are going to be going live inside the portal. So it's just our new shiny thing that we're messing around with, and I think we're probably going to start making this just a regular thing for anybody who's already in the portal and you want to follow up to Military Money Mistakes Live every Friday. I think we're going to try to go live inside there every week as well. And so if you'd like to join us, I put the link to that also in the comments as well. So feel free to hop in there with us and chat, just, questions, whatever, as we kind of go through the portal and talk about some of the features of that. So on to today's topic. I get asked a lot of questions by people about what kind of personal finance books I like to read. And, normally my answer is, well, not very many, especially, now there's a lot of stuff out there that all kind of blends into the same. I've already read a ton of them. And, a lot of the new books that come out aren't really teaching me anything new. Uh, I see a few every once in a while, but today I want to talk about one of the books that has really kind of shaped my perspective as far as my thought process and everything when it comes to dealing with money. And so the book we're going to talk about today, The Power of Zero, awesome book, written by a guy named David McKnight. And sorry, I'm getting over my sinus infection there, but awesome book. Read this. This is one of the few books out there that has really shaped my perspective, and I still go back to it anytime I need a refresher on some things, along with Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which of course is my personal favorite, and some of the other ones out there. But as I was reading it a couple weeks ago, I thought, oh, you know what, we should dive into that book on an episode of Military Money Mistakes Live. So we're going to talk about it today. And really, the whole point of the book is, how do you obtain or get as close to as possible having 0% tax bracket when you retire, and using some other tools that are out there that you don't hear a lot about in order to get there, or at least as close as you can as possible when you're in retirement. And so this is one of the main premises of the book. Taxes are going to have to increase. So there was a NPR broadcast, a guy named David Walker, who go look him up. I won't tell you his background. Just go look him up if you're kind of wondering about his, what his credentials were to say this. When he said, "Hey, you know what? Eventually, one of two things is going to happen. We're either going to have to basically, if we're going to maintain our current level of Social Security funding, we're either going to have to double our taxes, or we're going to have to cut our benefits." And if you followed some of the other posts I've talked about, where there was a report that came out where they project that the Social Security reserves will be depleted in 2034. Why is that significant? Because right now, current funding, they can only fund about 75% of Social Security. So they have these Social Security reserves that make up the other 25% of the benefits. Well, if that gets depleted, obviously they're not going to be able to make up the rest of that funding. So we're going to end up having to cut the benefits, is one of the options. And the other one is, hey, we're going to have to increase taxes on people as they, as time goes on. And so, if you look at right now where we're at, uh, taxes are probably about as good as they're going to get in our lifetime right now. Right now, currently, the TCGA, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, expires on January 1st, 2026. Now, that's assuming that Congress does the one thing that they're good at, and which is nothing, right? If they do absolutely nothing, those tax cuts will expire. We'll go back to where we were before the TCGA, JA, the old tax brackets. Same thing with deductions, all that. It's all going to go back the way it was before that act was passed. And obviously, you would most likely, especially for military retirees, those are the really who we're talking to right now. The people who get out and they go out and get a second job. Now you're making twice as much money as you ever had before. Your taxes are going to go up significantly. You already know that to start with, because when you get out, your pension is going to be taxed. Your Obviously your VA disability isn't taxed, but now you're going to go out and get a new job. Some of you may start paying state taxes. That was a new thing for me when I retired, because I didn't pay state taxes on my military income. But yes, we get back to this. Taxes are going to have to increase. And the other thing with that too is, a lot of people don't know this. When you retire, your Social Security payments are tax-free. However, if you have other income, if you have money in a pension, like people in the military do, or you have money from a 401k, whatever, and you take out or you receive above a certain level of income, there's some formulas. I'm not going to go through them because I don't want to fry your brain. But essentially what's going to happen is they're going to start taxing your Social Security income as well. So all these years you've been taxed on all this stuff, they're going to continue to tax you and tax you and tax you until you're dead. And then, lucky you, if you're worth enough, they'll still tax your estate as well. But essentially what the premise of this book is how do we reduce your tax rate to 0% in retirement? And, the first thing we talk about are the different buckets. These are the different ways that your assets or income, your retirement savings can be taxed, right? So we have our taxable bucket. That just means every year, this would be like if you've got an E-Trade account or Acorn or whatever, Betterment account. Every year, the growth inside that account is going to be taxed as income. Once it's taxed, that becomes your new basis. That means that's your new starting point. So the next year, the growth from where it started until the end of the year, that will also count as taxable income. So, obviously that adds to your taxable income every year. If you have a bunch of money in there and you make, I think right now the limit, the last I saw it was, I need to go back and look what the limits are for 2023. How much money you have to make before your Social Security gets taxed. But if you have too much money in that taxable account, obviously the market does very well. You get a lot of growth. You're going to have a lot of income, which is going to get taxed and probably cause your Social Security to get taxed. That's, of course, assuming Social Security is even still around by the time we retire. So that's your tax deferred bucket. So this is the one that probably a lot of you may be familiar with when we talk about tax deferred. That's like your traditional IRAs, your traditional 401k, or if you have your traditional TSP. Essentially, you're putting away money right now. You're not paying tax on it now, so they call it pre-tax. However, as that money continues to grow and grow and grow, it gets bigger. The amount hopefully gets bigger. You're not going to pay taxes on your contributions, but you will pay taxes on the withdrawals. And this is the big one. And he talks about this a lot in the book. Would you rather pay taxes on the seed or the harvest? Obviously maybe $1,000 today turns into $16,000 20 or 30 years from now. Well, what happens, when you put $200,000 in there, and now it's $1 million, right? You're going to get taxed on that money as you withdraw it. No, you're not going to get taxed on all of it all at once. But as you take that money out every year, you're going to get taxed on it. One of the other big things about tax deferred accounts, because a lot of people say, well, I'm smarter than that, I just won't touch it. Well, there's this thing called the required minimum distribution, or RMD, where you're required to take out a certain portion of that because the government is already ahead of you on that. uh, they know, like, okay, they can't just leave it in there forever and never pay taxes on it. So they know, hey, at a certain age, you're going to have to take out. They have a formula for calculating what your RMD is every year. It's based off the amount that you have in there and your age. And you're going to have to withdraw a certain amount every year from that account so that they can tax it, because they need to get their money too. And then probably the best bucket of the three, my personal favorite, is the tax-free bucket. And so this would be like your Roth TSP, your Roth 401k, your Roth IRA. Uh, these are great. I guess it was around the mid 90s when they said, "Hey, why don't we come up with a system where people can pay taxes on their income now and then put it into this retirement account, and they don't get taxed on the growth, and then all their withdrawals are tax free as well." A lot of Congress people like the idea because it gave them more money right now. They didn't have to wait 30 or 40 years to tax that income. And so that was the creation of the Roth account. Again, too, it's not just the Roth. I'll talk about another option there for the tax-free bucket as well. But those are essentially, when we're looking at, how are all of your retirement savings being taxed? That's your three main options there. So, what are your tax-free options? Obviously, we already talked about a couple of those. Your Roth 401k. Again, too, these are great. They're not without their limitations, though. Obviously, these have contribution limits. For 2023, your contribution limit to a Roth IRA or 401k is $22,500. However, if you're over the age of 50, you can contribute up to an additional $7,500. It's called the catch-up provision. One of the other downsides to 401ks is typically, of all these types of accounts out there, they have the highest fees. I think I talked about this last week, where when 401ks came around, they had to be competitive. They had to compete with each other because the plan sponsors, the employers, were paying the fees. And so they said, hey, let's see here, approximately, yeah, I mean, see, that was Nate that put that up there. Yeah, maybe one of these days I'll do it where I'll show you the math if you guys need some help getting to sleep. Uh, but, I know the stuff. It's just talking through it, and the amount of time that we have allotted for this, it would take way too long to break it down. They typically have the highest fees. So one they used to be competitive, in order to get the business. And then one day somebody let the employers know, you don't have to pay these fees. The employees could pay the fees. Well, when they passed the fees on to the employees, there was no motivation for the people, the custodians of the accounts, to keep the fees low in order to compete, right? So the fees went up significantly. I think at one time, like, they were something like, some of them were 4.5%. If you remember previous discussions, I've talked about this. Every 1% in fees over 20 years costs you approximately 20% of your potential savings. So I think right now the national average is something like 2.25% for 401ks. The other downside of this, now, it's kind of a blessing, kind of a curse in the same token. You have the employer match for a Roth 401k. However, the employer match does not go into your Roth account. It goes into that traditional account. So you could potentially run into some issues there. As you get older, if you leave that money in the traditional bucket, it continues to grow and grow and grow. You get to the point where now you're older and you have to take required minimum distributions out of that traditional bucket. That could put you over the limit in order to where you'd have to pay tax on your Social Security income as well. Obviously, because these are mostly market-driven investments, there's market risks, attached to those. And then here's one that I never rule out, that I think a lot of people never talk about, are legislative risks. So what do I mean by that? Well, whenever something starts to become too, I forget who said this quote, but they said, uh, if there's one thing you can always count on, if something's a good enough of a deal, the government will figure out a way to tax it. So there have been, discussions in the past where they said, hey, okay, yeah, they can make post-tax contributions, but what if we just tax the growth in the Roth accounts as they withdraw that money? Um, I'm not, I'm not a fan of that. I wouldn't put it past them that eventually one day they're going to continue to come up with more and more creative ways of trying to get income taxes so they can fund some of these government programs that they've run into the ground. But yeah, who knows? You have your Roth IRA, which everybody's pretty familiar with. One of the big limitations with a Roth IRA is there are some income limitations, like your level of income, as to whether or not you can contribute directly into a Roth IRA or not. So it's not a big deal. There's a strategy called the backdoor Roth, which under Secure 2.0, that rule still remains intact, where yes, I can't contribute directly to a Roth IRA if I make over a certain amount of money, depending on my tax filing status. That'll determine what that amount is. However, there's nothing saying I can't make a non deductible contribution to a traditional IRA, meaning it's not pre tax, right? I'm just putting money into a traditional IRA, and then I can roll that over from the traditional IRA to the Roth IRA. So essentially, what they want to do is just they have to figure out ways to make your life difficult somehow. So they just said, yeah, we'll allow this. Uh, it's just an extra step that you have to do, but you're still able to indirectly make contributions to a Roth IRA that way. Again, two contribution limits, $6,500 for the year for 2023. And then if you're over the age of 50, the catch up provision of an additional $1,000 into that account. Obviously, too, there's fees involved with that. They're usually not as high as they are with 401ks, but they're still there. There's no match with a Roth IRA, so it's you and you alone. Again, too, and then you still have the market risk and the potential for legislative risk. And then there's the third option. So, what is the third option? And that's the big topic that David McKnight talks about in the book, right? And it's called the Life Insurance Retirement Plan, or LIRP. And the first time I ever saw it, I was like, "What?" I had no. So when I saw saw it broken out, I was like, "Oh, okay." I immediately understood what he was talking about. Basically, at its most essential or basic level, it is a permanent life insurance policy, and so there's different types of policies, permanent life insurance policies out there too. So that could realistically be serve as a life insurance retirement plan. But one of the great things about these is, the contribution limits are set by you, right? It's the way that you design the policy. Essentially, you could have it to where there's no contribution limits. Um, there's no income limits. So if you make too much money, there's nothing saying you can't contribute. In fact, these are actually very popular for people who do make a lot of money because they don't have to do the backdoor Roth or anything like that. This has become a very popular option for a lot of people who have a lot of money, because obviously when we're working towards building wealth, yeah, we want to grow our assets, but once we've grown them, what do we want to do? We want to protect it, which is one of the most important aspects of this strategy, the life insurance retirement plan. There's no legislative risk. So was it 2005? He talks about this in the book. George Bush convened a committee to go back and look at some of the laws and make sure that they're closing some of these tax loopholes. And these life insurance retirement plans were left unscathed. Especially for policies already in place. Now, that's not to say eventually, again, too, Congress could go back and say, yeah, we're going to figure out some way that we can tax this because we need more money. One of the other important pieces of this is there's no market risk, and any gains that you have inside this plan are locked in. at least, for the ones that we look at, any gains that you have are locked in. And then some additional benefits, things that you don't necessarily get uh, from like a 401k or IRA. There's provisions for long-term care. The majority of the costs are up front. I'm not saying there's no cost whatsoever. However, you pay most of those up front. And then as time goes on, the longer you have this, and of course, the more money that you have in there, uh, on a timeline, your whatever your fee percentage over the life of the plan gets lower and lower. So what's the downside to it? Well, the biggest downside is that you have to qualify for it. You don't have to qualify for a 401k. You don't have to qualify for an IRA, but you do have to qualify for this, because the key word inside this is life insurance, right? So, uh, but as far as, how does it work, right? So traditionally, when we talk about life insurance, a lot of people, like the old way of thinking is, well, I want to pay the least amount of money possible for the most death benefit that I can get. And that's, if you're talking about pure insurance like that transfer of risk, right? Okay, yeah, that makes sense. However, with the LRP, what we're trying to do is we want to put as much money into this as possible and buy the least amount of death benefit, because the reason we want to do that is that keeps our costs as low as possible, which means our accumulation is maximized inside the policy. So kind of the two big differences there between like what most people are used to or what most people know about when they talk about life insurance and the life insurance retirement plan. And so how does this fit into my strategy, right? What do we, like when we're looking at how am I saving for retirement? What are the steps that we do here? What are my priorities, I guess would be the best way to put it. So this is where I kind of depart a little bit from the book, because he says fully fund your LRP before you even do your employer match, your Roth contributions into a 401k. I personally think, yeah, you know what? At a minimum, get the employer match into your 401k. Make sure you're making your contributions into the Roth bucket. Now, if we're talking about business owners, let's have another discussion about that sometime. But this is for the majority of people who go out and get a job somewhere at one of these, maybe as a contractor or something like that. Then fully fund your LRP. When I say fully, I mean max that out every year if you can. Like if you can put $25,000 or $28,000 into that every year, do it. Because that's, again, too, like the whole strategy here is we max out the contributions. We put as much as we can into this based off of how we design it. I know we said there's no limits to contributions. There are limits, but those are set by you, right? It's how you design the plan is going to determine how much money you can put into that. But put as much as you can into that, especially as early on as possible, because we talk about this and the coaching stuff, and then the cohort will become the class. Like time is the greatest accumulator of wealth, and the more you can put in there as early as possible, the more you're going to have later on down the road. And then once you get into that, then you can look at maxing out. If you have contributing the maximum amount into your employer Roth account, and maxing out an IRA after that. The great part about this is once you get done with these, when you retire for good, right? Assuming you're over the age 59 and a half, we've talked about this before with some of these accounts, these 401ks and IRAs, obviously those are still tied to the market. There's still some market risk. Guess what? Once you're retired and not contributing to these plans anymore, you can actually reduce the amount of risk that you have to these accounts by moving them over to your LRP, because now not only are you protecting it from taxation, you're also protecting it from market risk. So how to use it in retirement? That's another big question that we get a lot. So a few different strategies here. Obviously, a buffer. What do I mean about that? Having a buffer during your first 10 years of retirement. So if I'm living off of all these 401k, IRA, some of these other assets. I have a pension, so maybe I don't need to depend on those as much. But when we have a bad year, kind of like 2022, I don't want to touch that stuff when it's down, right? Because that's really when you lose, is when you take money out when you're down. So here's something where it's not tied to the market. I can take money out of this and allow all my market driven stuff to come back up. So the buffer strategy, huge. I remember reading something where somebody nerded out on this math behind this, and they said, if you have a buffer, your first uh, 10 years of retirement, it significantly increases your chances that you'll never run out of money. Asset protection, we already talked about that. If you have assets that are maybe in some of those other buckets, like the traditional, the tax deferred or whatever, you can take those out and you can move them over to the LRP. And now all you're doing is you're changing the way it's taxed when you use it again. Keep in mind, when you take that money out of those traditional accounts, you're going to get taxed on it. But you're also reducing the amount of risk that the market poses to it as well. You can use it to create a second pension. So a lot of these plans will have provisions in there where you can use it to generate an income stream for you. So now you have a second pension, more mailbox money for you. You can use it for, covering medical, long-term care costs. One of these days we'll do an episode on long-term care. It is an important issue, but it's something that as time goes on, is going to become more and more prevalent for you as you get older. And then the last piece, obviously estate planning, assets that are in there, when you pass away, it's distributed to your beneficiaries who you control whenever you want. You can change the beneficiary, but it's given to them as a tax-free lump sum, which is a far more efficient transfer of assets than some of the other methods out there. So last question in here. How do you get started? Well, step one, get informed. Best way to do that, go to the portal. The link is in the comments section. You can also, just go to the website there. We have a web link there, militaryretirementblueprint.com. That's our portal. You can go in there. We have all kinds of information and resources it's just to help you get a better informed perspective, right? And then you can make the decision as to whether or not you think it's for you or not. So step two is get qualified. And that, it's simply set up a call with somebody. We do a quick screening, figure out, what steps do we need to take to make sure we know whether or not you can qualify for this. And then step three, as anything that you do, get moving, right? You have to get started. If you ever want to make any progress, you got to start somewhere. So that's it for today. Definitely check the book out. Again, to the Power of Zero. One last reminder about the portal. Scott and I will be in there again too. The link to that live session, the follow up to this, is going to be in the comments for this. And one last plug for the beta cohort. Like I said, we're still looking for a couple more people. Anybody who signs up to it is going to have free access to it for life. So as we add a bunch of new features and all that stuff, it'll still be free to you. So appreciate you coming in, spending some time with me. Next week is going to be a big one. That we're going to talk about the Survivor Benefit Plan open season, which is a huge, a lot of people don't realize how big of a deal that is for military retirees. But I'm also going to have a couple of special guests on there as well. So looking forward to that and seeing you guys next week, 1 p.m. here on Military Money Mistakes Live. And so I'm going to sign off here, and for any of you who join us there inside the portal for the after show, I'll see you there. Thanks.